And good evening and welcome, fellow scribblers, writers, people who do stuff vaguely creatively on Twitch, and anybody else who's watching. Yay, welcome back. It's Monday, it's Drew's Day, it's time to do more waffling about writing, because that's what we do on this stream. We talk about things, and sometimes we even write things down and create stuff as well, but who knows what may transpire this evening. Welcome one and welcome all back to the writing stream, back to Monday evening. Well, Monday evening here in the UK, Monday possibly at some time, for depending on which part of the world you're in. Most of us are probably on Monday, some of us in the morning, some of us in the afternoon, some of us in the evening, some of us maybe late at night, thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I listening to some strange middle-aged man waffle on the computer? Hopefully maybe while doing something else slightly more constructive, but who knows what you're doing. And for those of you watching this on YouTube, hello. You'll see this in a few days. There we go. But anyway, welcome on and welcome all to the registry. Well, we must do the thing, because as of course the thing is the thing, and the thing must be done. Have a Boo Boo is first in the chat with 4 thumbs up. That's very enthusiastic. Have a Boo Boo, good to see you. Commander Tragic Blue 21 is here as well. Commander JR1988, good to see you, sir. The Harkonnens are here, continuing the invasion of Arrakis. But what has happened to Arrakis? We don't know. Glenn R. Frank is here, stalwart of the stream. Commander C. Dweller is here as well. Wintermute GB is here. Of course he is, because you can't do a stream without Wintermute GB. It's just impossible. The Arrakis is here! They have survived. Or surviving the ongoing invasion of the Harkonnens. They are still here. Wow! Good to see you, Arrakis. It's good to. We were exceedingly worried that the invasion had finally taken place, and we were going to hear from you no more. So it's good to see you once again. That's excellent. Dear, it's all good. So Frank Meyer 2949 is here as well. Lucky Luigi is here. Big 39GT is here. We're all good. We're all good. I see we're all making Flatland jokes already, which of course is going to be inevitable, really. But good on you. Well done. I'm impressed. I expected nothing less, of course. So because it's an obvious thing to do, isn't it? It's an obvious thing to do. And we will get to that. We will get to that in a moment. We will get that in a moment. There we go. It's going to be one of those evenings, isn't it? Yes, it is. I make no apology for it or whatsoever. It's going to be one of those evenings. Yes, it is. There's going to be some very flat jokes, indeed. Dad jokes, of course. Well, I'm a dad, so I mean, what am I supposed to do? But never mind. Now, before we get to the sci-fi, and before we get to the books, actually, a little bit of an announcement. Bum, bum, bum. It's not immediately going to impact anything, but it will impact us at some point in the relatively near future. So I wanted to give you guys all a bit of a heads up that this is coming. Because, my dear friends, there is going to be a bit of an interruption to the streaming coming your way this year. You've probably heard me and my wife talk about this in the past, at various degrees of certainty or uncertainty. We finally made our mind up, and we are going to be moving house. And we are going to be moving, as you probably know already, to Scotland. Now we're planning this move later this year, and in order to get the house ready and things kind of in the right place, we are going to be selling our house down here in Kent first, and we are going to be moving into rented accommodation probably for a certain period of time. And then finding the right house up in Scotland. Now, the English and the Scottish systems of buying a house, are not the same. So we've got to negotiate that a little bit, and quite a few other bits and pieces as well. So what that is going to mean is all of my stuff, alas, is going to have to go into storage. And we're going to have to basically prepare the house ready for sale. So. What I'm going to do at the moment is I'm afraid, my friends, and it's not a permanent situation, but we'll see how it goes. I'm going to stop streaming around the end of June. So I can devote all the time to getting the house prepared, because I'm going to have to dismantle all the green screens and everything. All the big computers are going to have to go away, and all the gear, because we're going to be moving into a small place to rent. So I shall be offline for a bit, alas. And I wanted to give you a heads up. This is happening. It's all positive stuff, but it's I've got to go through the process, okay, of getting everything ready. So I'm not quite. What I can't say to you, I'm afraid, is exactly when will I resume the streaming. I mean, I'll still be on social media, and we'll probably still be doing the odd YouTube video of our travails and our travels and stuff. But I can't at the moment commit to a long-term Twitch streaming schedule. So we'll continue to do stuff for this first half of the year, but there will be a point, probably at the end of June, I think, we've sort of penned it in, where I'm going to have to stop for a bit and devote myself entirely to the process of moving house. So we'll have plenty of shenanigans up until that point, but I wanted to kind of give you a heads up that was coming. Will I be swapping to tartan screens? I don't know. Yeah. Am I going to take the bagpipes and wear a kilt? And that's pretty spooky. So watch out, Scotland Druids coming. Yes, the stream could have taken it anymore. Guy Lanou. It's the end of the world as we know it will alas be. But there we go. Postponing streams is okay, but no delays on getting your next book. Now the next book is making good progress. I know that I did another 1,000 words today. And I've got a whole bunch of other stuff. So yes, I will definitely get the book out. I promise, honest, cross my heart and hope to die kind of thing. Actually, no, I don't do that. Not that I'm suspicious or anything. Space Tea and Tonics around sound good to me. And Scotch tape. So yeah, so it's just me. I'll put this a little announcement on all the streams I do for this next week, so everyone catches up, because not everybody watches all of my streams, obviously. But tartan paint, yeah, that works. So, but yeah, we've been thinking of doing this for about 6 or 7 years now. We finally decided that this is the year that we kind of need to make all the stars align. So yeah, give you War and Peace some homework. See you in a couple of years then. So yeah, and you need to buy all my books so I can afford the move. So yeah, lots of complexity here. We're basically we got to sell our house, we got to move, we got to get all the stuff into storage. We got one kid is already in Scotland. We got to get the other one out, and various other bits and pieces that are happening. We got 20 years of crap in the house. Needs to be sorted and mostly chucked out, I suspect. That's a big thing, and lots of other things. We're taking my mum with us as well. So I've got to sort that aspect of all the things out. So we need a house with an annex and various other bits of things. So it's a complicated beast, okay? And we're going to have to dedicate our entire runtime to its solution. So it's just sort of a heads up. Okay, I will be stopping streaming from the end of June for a temporary hiatus, and I'm not quite sure how long, I'm afraid. Do I know where in Scotland? Well, the search area basically is sort of 2 hours away from, 2 to 3 hours away from Glasgow and Edinburgh. I want to be in the southern area of Scotland because I still want access to rest of the UK, basically. So I want to be able to get to places like London without too much trouble. So it's going to be the southern end of Scotland rather than the northern end of Scotland. But the precise location is unknown at this stage. So there we go. Right. So that's enough of that. Think of all the Scottish delicacy, deep fried haggis, deep fried Mars bars, and the rest. Well, I don't know if those things are actually real or whether they're just made up. We'll have to find out. Borders then, yes. So maybe I can find a small Scottish castle. That would be good. Wagar Castle. What I am hoping to do long term is open an Airbnb on my property, though. So maybe I'll do some writing retreats, and some of you can come up, and some of you can stay over and go. There we go. Because I can't do that here. I haven't got enough space. Castle Wagar. Yes, that's right, on the Scottish moors. Somewhere in the borders, maybe Ayrshire, Dumfries, Galloway. That sort of area, somewhere around there. But we're not entirely sure yet. Neeps and tatties, yes. They are real. Okay, so let's come on to see you, Vala. Excellent. Okay. Oh, deep fried haggis. Well, haggis, yes. I wasn't sure about the Mars bar. I wondered if that was a bit of an urban myth, but I haven't been there. Lard Wagar, yes. My Crimson Brassard. I need to get one of those, don't I? That'd be really, really cool. So there you go. Anyway, so just FYI, and the reasons for the move. I will do. We're planning to do a video. I'd love a claymore. Yes, I would love a claymore. Maybe I'll get one of those. That would be quite cool. Maybe even learn how to use it, or maybe not. You do. Okay, so you've had a deep fried Mars bar. Excellent, it's all right. I can't imagine what deep fried Mars bars actually like, but sounds wrong. Battered mushrooms are deadly gorgeous. Yes, well, mushrooms I like. Mushrooms are good. And my wife and I discovered we like Drambuie as well, which is a Scottish drink, which is sort of whiskey and honey mixed together, from what I understand. And we we guzzled a bottle of that rather quickly, actually, for the last week or so. So that was good. So yeah, so more information as it comes, and more information as it sort of firms up. I just want to give you guys all a bit of a heads up that that's coming and it's imminent over the summer. So right, so there we go. That's my news. Onwards we go. Now, it's time to talk about this book. Okay, Flatland. Okay, where's my screen? There we go. Right, here we go. Love a clay more than what? Says Frank Miner. That's what you did there. Have you tossed a caber yet? No, I haven't tossed a caber. That looks like a... yeah, so I'll be an English Canadian. Well, actually, no, I'm not English. Yeah, steady on there, JR1988. It'll get me lynched. I'm not English. I live in England, but I'm not English. I'm a British Canadian from Kent in Scotland. Though one of my ex-colleagues at work, when he heard I was potentially moving to Ayrshire, he basically said, he said, well, you could write your memoirs on that move. He said, I kind of looked at him because he had that sort of glint in his eye. I thought there's a joke in here somewhere. And he said, you've got a title for me, haven't you? And he said, yes, I have. And I said, okay, then what is it? He said, it's Air on a Shoestring. Which I actually thought was quite good. But he said, you can't use it because it's copyright to me now, so you're going to have to pay me royalties if you use it. And I'm like, damn. Okay, I'm not doing that. Sorry, it wasn't even my joke, okay? So you can't groan at me. Anyway, right, moving swiftly on, because anybody else who's watching this thinking, wow, what happened to the in-depth and acerbic and insightful review of the Flatland novel? Unfortunately for any of you who think you are now about to get that, you obviously haven't watched any of my streams before, because that's very unlikely to happen even now. But anyway, let's move in. Now, this is an interesting book. Okay. In Scotland, the word Kent might be misconstrued. Well, yeah, so the acclimatisation is going to be a thing, isn't it? I'm going to have to try my Scottish out. But I've got a few friends who live up that way, so and people who've done the move in advance of me. So I've got a few resources to call on. Let's put it that way. I'm a fairly adaptable chap, as you know. Right, so this is Flatland. Now, this is written by Edwin Abbott. Why his middle name is the same as his last name is a story that hasn't been told, and I couldn't find out about it. It's pretty old, this one. Okay, so Edwin A. Abbott, or Edwin Abbott, and it's curious because apparently he was a theologian as well. So he's Abbott by name and sort of Abbott by nature. He was an English scholar, a theologian, and a writer. So yeah, there we go. We're in good company. Lived from 1838 to 1926. So it's almost 100 years since he died. I don't know when this book was written. When was it written? As opposed to not written. 1884. Okay, so this one's 10 years before the stuff that we've been doing. But yeah, so sort of a contemporary of H.G. Wells, possibly. And he would have written this about the age of, 1884 is when he was in his, late 30s, looking at that. Yeah, so late 30s, early 40s. Edwin A. Abbott, so Abbott. Sadistic parents, yeah, exactly. Maybe his parents just had to start. Who knows? I mean, there's a story that needs to be told, isn't it? And I don't know if this graphic here is part of the original cover art or something, but it's Flatland, okay, a romance of many dimensions. And it does feature different dimensions. So there's no dimensions, which is dubbed point land. 2 dimensions, which is 1 dimension, which is termed line land. 2 dimensions, which is termed flatland, and 3 dimensions, which is termed space land. Now it's worth remembering those, because it's a little bit tricky to get into to start with this book, and it's definitely of its time as well. Now it's written, and this is quite weird actually. And it says here, with illustrations by the author A Square. Now, he's not talking about sort of 1980s interpretation of being a square, as in someone who's really sort of straight-laced and has no fun at all, doesn't let their hair down kind of thing. No, actually, literally a square. Okay, so a two-dimensional being. Now, I have read this before, but I don't know where I read it, because when I read this one back, over the last few days to kind of prepare for this stream, because I do my homework. Okay, I take this seriously. All right, so not that I'm shaming any of you for not having done it, but yeah, shame on you. Whoever hasn't kept up to date with the homework. So guilt. Even though that's since you've been at school, have you? Turn your homework in on time. In fact, anybody who hasn't done their homework is in detention now. All right, I want you to go home and write out 1,000 times using a malfunctioning biro. I must pay more attention in Drew streams. Okay, go. You can go do it now. It's fine. No, only kidding. Drew's going to put a pause on this because we've been slacking. Yeah, a book a week. It isn't an easy read. No, and not just because of its language, but also because of some of the things it comes up with. It's definitely a product of its time. You need to tread carefully here. I got it done. Says Sea Dweller. Creep. Can I? Okay, you give me an apple, Mr. Sea Dweller. It's for that as well. Excellent. Bribery and corruption never fail. Yeah, Glenn, what's the matter with you? I mean, come on, man. Yeah. For the program, I suppose what you can do actually, these streams really aren't because we'll never get to the end of the book in the stream because we haven't got enough time, and I waffle, etc. But it kind of gives you an introduction as would you want to persevere with this book or not? So War of the Worlds, I reckon I kind of gave 8 out of 10, I think, or 7 out of 10 for War of the Worlds. I thought it was really rather good. The Time Machine I was less impressed with. I gave it a sort of 5 or 6 rating, I think, maybe a 6. Because it was an earlier H.G. Wells, and it wasn't as good as War of the Worlds. So there we go. Now, anyway, so on to Flatland. Now, I don't know anything about Edwin A. Abbott. I didn't really look him up, but he was apparently a scholar, a theologian, and a writer. And this book is written from the perspective of A Square, which is in fact a two-dimensional creature living in a two-dimensional realm. Okay, so that's important to kind of grasp early on, because it's a peculiarly constructed story, and it's written to the inhabitants of space in general, and HC in particular. I don't know who HC was. Maybe that's somebody, in the. I'm not sure if that's somebody in the book or somebody he knows personally. This work is dedicated by a humble native of Flatland, fair enough, in the hope that even he is initiated into the mysteries of 3 dimensions, having previously conversant with only 2, so the citizens of that celestial region may aspire yet higher and higher to the secrets of 4, 5, or even 6 dimensions. Let's not constrict ourselves, thereby contributing to the enlargement of the imagination and the possible development of that rare and most gift of modesty. Okay, among the superior races. Okay, what does that mean? Of solid humanity. I'm not quite sure what that means. Feels a bit dodged, that does. So okay, we'll keep that one under advisement. And yes, so Sea Dweller, quite right. Okay, so a Shakespeare scholar as well, hence the quote from Hamlet. Yes, and then okay, now I'm not. This is interesting. So this is. Then you find in here in the text a preface to the second and revised edition in 1884. So I don't know if there was an earlier one. And this is super obtuse. Okay, I'm not sure this preface is at all useful. Okay, because it's basically a description. It's attempting to describe the problem of perceiving different dimensions from the perspective of a dimension below. Okay, so it goes about it in the most peculiar way, and this sort of text here. The first paragraph is quite representative of the entire rest of the novel. So it's a little bit heavy going and quite heavy wading at times. So if my poor Flatland friend retained the vigour of mind which he enjoyed when he began to compose these memoirs, I should not now need to represent him in this preface, which he desires firstly to return his thanks to his readers and critics in Spaceland, whose appreciation has, with unexpected celerity, required a second edition of his work. Secondly, to apologise for certain errors and misprints, for which, however, he is entirely responsible. And thirdly, to explain one or two misconceptions. But he's not the square he once was. Years of imprisonment and the still heavier burden of general incredulity and mockery have combined with the natural decay of old age to erase from his mind many of the thoughts and notions of much of the terminology which he acquired during his short stay in Spaceland. He has therefore requested me to reply on his behalf to two special objections, one of intellectual and the other of a moral nature. That's one of those paragraphs that you just think, what? What? So it's okay. It's a little bit heavyweight. Okay, so the essence of this first bit basically is trying to explain that a two-dimensional being perceives other two-dimensional beings as a line in space. Okay, and basically, the perception is, the two-dimensional creatures have length and breadth, but they don't have any height. But they can clearly make each other out, so they have some aspect of height that they can kind of appeal to you. And he's basically commenting about, well, if there's a little bit of height, surely there possibly could be some more height. Okay, it takes a long time to get to that point. So that's kind of what the first paragraph is. This first section is all about. It's heavy going. Okay, so you have to sort of just roll with it a little bit. He uses what he does is he uses the technique of conversation between opposing or slightly differing viewpoints to put across the point he's trying to make. But he's also chatty as a narrator with you, the reader. So he kind of asks you to join him in the conversation every so often. It's a bit weird, being sort of 19th century prose is a little bit tricky. So that's just that's just sort of, it's kind of oddly enough by the editor. It's oddly enough the bit of the story that needs the most editing, which is quite ironic, I thought. So yeah, you have to wade through it, but get past that, and then the kind of the overall thing starts to appear. Okay. So the concept you've got to have is here. This is a report. Basically, it's an account of a story told by another being, and this being is a two-dimensional creature living in a two-dimensional world. Okay, and basically, what happens first is that he basically describes that world so that we're familiar with the two-dimensional world, and then what happens, and it's quite. He paints it in a quite interesting way. We'll get to that as we go through it. Then the second part of the novel is basically he encounters two different visitors to his two-dimensional world. Now, two-dimensional world is called Flatland, okay? Three-dimensional world is called Spaceland. And there's also Lineland, which is a one-dimensional world. And there's Pointland, which is a zero-dimensional world. He basically encounters two creatures from different dimensions as part of this. And basically, what's quite interesting here is the two-dimensional square that we're talking to here, the story is being related from the perspective of, is imprisoned in two-dimensional Flatland for telling the story. Okay, so basically he's had a bit of a revelation and claims he's met these creatures from different dimensions. He relates his story and gets locked up because of his story. Okay, that's what's happened to him. So that's the essence of what's going on here. So the old classic thing about not too much description. Okay, well. 2/3 of the book is literally scene setting, right? Nothing happens at all for the first 2/3 of the book. So it's not in that classic, get cut to the chase kind of thing. It's interesting to put it in context though, because it's, this is kind of pre now. the established sci-fi novel. So it's more of it's kind of almost a thought experiment, I would say, rather than it is a novel. And as that, it's quite intriguing, particularly in of its time. In serious nature, is it a commentary on 19th century social structures in the UK? Could be. I mean, I'll let you make that conclusion. Draw that conclusion if you wish to. I think there's definitely something in that train of thought. What was the purpose behind this book? Asked Glenn. Oh, I think that's quite good. Was it to just explore the concept of dimensions and try and get that across to other people in rather than just being a dry academic paper? Maybe it was an exercise in just doing that. I don't know what the motivation behind this novel was. Was it wine induced? Possibly alcohol induced. Yeah. So his satirical, hopefully. Well, we'll get to the description of women, because it's actually pretty appalling, to be honest. So we'll cover that. But yeah, I don't know. Is it satirical? I hope it is, because if it isn't satirical, it's pretty dire. But there we go. So let's find out. So anyway, so the first part of this book, The World, it's a description of Flatland. Now this does have some merit. It's not just description, because he's kind of exploring the concept of Flatland. And he sets off, and I assume these diagrams are actually in the original book, so it's actually quite helpful at getting started here. And he's addressing an audience of three-dimensional creatures, i.e. us. Okay, so basically this is quite useful. Okay, so imagine a vast sheet of paper which lines, triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons and other figures, instead of remaining fixed in their places, move about freely on the surface, but without the power of rising above or sinking below, very much like shadows, only hard with luminous edges. Okay, and you will have a pretty correct notion of my country and countrymen. Alas, a few years ago I should have said my universe, but now my mind has been opened to higher views of things. In such a country you'll perceive at once it's impossible that there should be anything of what you call a solid kind, but today you will suppose that you're at least distinguished by the sight triangles, squares and other figures moving about as I've described them. But we don't perceive anything of that kind, not at least to distinguish one figure from the other. Nothing was visible, nothing could be visible apart from straight lines. Okay, so they only perceive the edges of themselves, okay, which to them are kind of the exterior edges. So no matter what shape you are, your initial perception visually is of just a line of certain length, okay, because there's only two dimensions, all right? So he kind of explains that with this diagram here. Okay, so there's a triangle here seen from the top, which of course they can't do. Okay, that's looking down in a third dimension. If you look at it along the plane or get close to the plane, you get a squash triangle and ultimately a very squash triangle, and eventually you'll end up with a line, right? Okay, so you guys know, you guys are familiar with multiverses and dimensions and things, so you get how this works. So he draws a few parallels. Has an interesting little thing here about where, because these guys can see things, so they're clearly illuminated in some fashion, and so he alludes to the fact that in two-dimensional Flatland there is a debate going on as to where light comes from, because they can't have an above from the light to shine on because there's no up. So where does the light come from? It's an interesting debate. You may ask perhaps under how these disadvantageous circumstances we are able to distinguish our friends from one another, but the answer to this very natural question will more fitly and be easily given when I describe the inhabitants of Flatland. Okay, he goes on there, and then he does a bit more scene building. So this is actually, he's not just basically saying, "Oh, here's Flatland, that's how it works." He's actually got a he's done a little bit of lore. He's done a bit of world building, and they do have points of the compass. Okay, so the world is organised in north, south, east, and west. But there being no sun or heavenly bodies, it's impossible to determine north in the usual way. But we have a method of our own. Okay, by a law of nature with us, there is a constant attraction to the south, so they get pulled south as if they're on a sheet of paper that's been stuck up on a wall. Okay, so they feel like almost like a force of gravity that pulls them south rather than down. All right. Mad Monks off felt the book was rather flat. We've done that one, Mad Monks off. You're late. We've done that about 4 times now. Stop it. So having south as sort of where things naturally go if they're left unattended acts as their kind of compass, right? That's how it's structured. Now, there's an initial comment which gives you a hint as to the tone of the rest of the book. Though in temperate climates, this is very slight. Okay, so the further up you go, so it's almost like there's a sort of northern hemisphere bias going on. Okay, so it's almost like the equator would be hot. Okay, and that's where the attraction seems to come from. And the further north you go, it gets more temperate, and the attraction becomes less. Okay, and it becomes so very slight that even a woman in reasonable health can journey several furlongs northward without much difficulty. That's how easy it is. Even a woman in good health can do it. Mr. Abbott, you need to have some words about this. Okay, now this was written in 1884, but really. So this gives you a sense of the time in which it was written. And I do wonder, whether this was satirical or not. It does make you wonder that you could write such a thing. I mean, you obviously couldn't write such a thing nowadays without being utterly tongue-in-cheek. But could you have written something like that then and been totally serious? I fear that you probably could. So what happens at the end of the world? I don't know. And north is kind of up, but they don't have up. So up and down are reserved words. You can't have that. So anyway, it goes on. It goes on. So in the more temperate regions, the southward attraction is hardly felt. Walking sometimes in a perfectly desolate plain where there have been no houses or trees to guide me, I have been occasionally compelled to remain stationary for hours, waiting for the rain. I don't know how the rain works in Flatland, but apparently that does happen. He contemplates for hours on the weak and the aged, especially on delicate females. He's got a thing about females, Mr. Abbott. And the force of attraction tells more heavily than that on the robust of the male sex. Okay, so men are robust, and women can be in reasonable health, but that's about as far as they can get. In the country where there are no houses, the trunks of the trees serve as some sort of guide. Okay, so they can basically, there is a map. Okay, they can kind of work their way around two-dimensional world. This is, and again, here it comes again. This is how they make their houses. Okay, houses are two-dimensional as well, so they're effectively just lines connected together, and men have a door and women have a door. Now there's a segregation there. I'm not sure what two-dimensional trees look like. That's not explained as far as I'm aware. There's a reason. There's a particular reason why houses are pentagrams. And because they're basically Flatlanders don't like pointy things. All right. Pointy things are bad. Okay, so you really don't want to have sharp edges on anything if you could avoid it. So square and triangular houses are not allowed. Okay, not allowed to build square and triangular houses. The angles of a square, and still more those of an equilateral triangle, be much more pointed than those of a pentagon, and the lines of inanimate objects such as houses being dimmer than the lines of men and women. So it's interesting that alive creatures, alive things in 2D Flatland are easier to perceive than inanimate things. Okay, so basically, don't run around too fast in two-dimensional world because you might impinge upon a point. Okay, a sharp edge, a vertices. And do yourself an injury, puncture your two-dimensional self. Okay, so triangular houses were universally forbidden by law. Interesting enough, the only exceptions being fortifications, powder magazines, barracks, and other state buildings. So quite how gunpowder works in a two-dimensional world, I'm not entirely sure. But we'll come to the circles in a minute. Actually, Sean, that circles are interesting. Okay. Square houses were permitted but discouraged by a special tax. Okay? So the less corners you had on your house, the more you were taxed. That's how this world works. It's odd, but it's obviously gone through a thinking process in this, which I can at least appreciate and admire. Now the reason why there's men's doors and women's doors become clear in a bit. And this bit is fascinating. It's horrifying, but it's fascinating. Okay, Section 3 concerning the inhabitants of Flatland. Okay, the greatest length or breadth of a full-grown inhabitant flatland may be estimated about 11 of your inches. Okay, so a fully grown flatlander is about that big. All right. 12 inches may be regarded as a maximum. So no flatlanders get bigger than 12 inches in any particular direction. Okay, and then he does this amazing breakdown of how society works in Flatland. Okay, women are effectively the lowest rank. They're straight lines. They are two-dimensional creatures. Okay, they only have length, right? Soldiers and lowest class of workers are triangles with two equal sides, and a base or third side so short that they form at their vertices a very sharp and formidable angle. All right. Okay, so that's the next class up. Middle class people are equilateral or equal-sided triangles. All right, so a bit more classy type of triangle. Doesn't that make women and soldiers dangerous? We'll come to that. We'll come to that. Professional men and gentlemen are squares, of which class I belong myself. Okay, so we're getting this supposed story from the perspective of a square, a professional man, a gentleman. All right. Squares or five-sided figures or pentagons, right? Okay, so basically the more sides you have, the classier you are, all right? Next above these comes the nobility, right? Of which there are several degrees, beginning at 6 sided figures. So if you've got 6 sides, you become a member of the nobility, or hexagon. So that hexagon is the entry-level nobility. And from thence rising in the number of their sides until they receive the honourable title of polygonal or many-sided. Okay, that's the top honour you could achieve. Finally, when the number of the sides becomes so numerous and the sides themselves so small that the figure cannot be distinguished from a circle, he is included in the circular or priestly order, and this is the highest class of all. So yeah, okay, so this is this weird society is highly structured. Okay, and then this is rather curious here. It says the law of nature that a male child shall have more than one more side than his father. So if you're a square and you have a son, you'll give basically your wife presumably will give birth to a pentagon. Is everyone following this so far? It's pretty wacky. I think this is one of those books that's going to make a lot more sense if you have several pints of beer before drinking it. Okay. Thus, the son of a square is a pentagon, the son of a pentagon, a hexagon, and so on. Okay, but this rule doesn't apply unless you're already classy. All right, it doesn't apply to tradesmen, less often to the soldiers and the workmen, who indeed can hardly be said to deserve the name of human figures, since they have not all their sides equal. Okay, so they're sort of scum, basically. That's basically why they hold. So the law of nature doesn't hold for them, obviously. The son of an isosceles, a triangle with 2 sides equal, remains isosceles still. So it's unlikely, basically, that if you're in the lower class, you can in any way find better yourself or get your children to better themselves. Only if you're already classy can you climb the echelons of the society. It's dreadful, really, isn't it? Now, there's also this ghastly sound. This is almost eugenics. Okay, in this next bit. Okay, after a strict examination conducted by the Sanitary and Social Board, the infant, if certified regular, is with solemn ceremony admitted to the first class of equilaterals. Okay, so if you with all this structure that's been displayed up here. Okay, if you're and these are all acceptable shapes. Okay, they're regular shapes. Okay, now if you happen to not be regular. Right. Okay. So one of your sides is shorter. Woe betide you. One of your sides isn't the same length as the others. Basically, you're in serious trouble from this not too horrible sounding, but actually quite scarily named Sanitary and Social Board. Okay, so if you don't get the stamp of approval from them, he goes on later on, basically saying, "Yeah, well, we just get rid of them, we destroy them, or they're outcast, or they're stuff." So it's a pretty brutal society that's being painted here. Very, very class structured. Now, it is from 19th century England, where I mean, I remember my grandparents talking about class divides. It's not something you tend to notice class still does exist in the UK, and we're probably more class ridden than many other countries, I would say, even today. But we don't, most people in the UK are probably working stroke middle class now. Whereas back then there was a very tight bunch of upper class people, hardly any middle class people at all. A few professional people making a go of things, and then a lot of working class people. So, and you didn't tend to communicate across class boundaries at all. You just didn't. And so it does paint that sort of a picture. Now, whether this book is a mirror being held up to the class societies in the UK at the time, or whether it's painting that as a position of normality and trying to basically therefore reinforce it in print, I'm not entirely sure. But so that's an interesting debate to have. So let me know what you think about that. But he spends a lot of time on the class structure, and yeah, he the square who's relating the story totally believes in it. I mean, how admirable was this law of compensation? How perfect proof of the natural fitness, and may I say almost divine origin of the aristocratic constitution of the states in Flatland. So he basically says this law of nature that applies to the higher classes but not lower ones, divinely inspired, really, really good stuff. And the wretched rabble of the isosceles, planless and leaderless, are either transfixed without resistance by the small body of their brethren, whom the chief circle keeps in pay for emergency. So basically, kept down. Okay, and there we go. And then and then it then it really starts getting a bit kind of like section 4 concerning the women. Okay. Now, if our highly pointed triangles of the soldier class are formidable, now they're pointed, okay, so that's quite dangerous. So basically the way combat appears to happen in Flatland is basically if you have a sharp edge, you ram that sharp edge into the other person, and that basically kills them. Now, if our highly pointed triangles of the soldier class are formidable, it may be readily inferred that far more formidable are our women. Okay, for if a soldier is a wedge, a woman being a needle, being, so to speak, all point, at least at the two extremities, add to this the power of making herself practically invisible at will, because I suppose if you turn the line on its side, it's just a dot, okay? And you'll perceive that a female in Flatland is a creature by no means to be trifled with. Sage counsel here, okay, from Mr. Abbott. Perhaps some of my younger readers may ask how a woman in Flatland can make herself invisible. I think we can probably figure that one out. Okay, so don't worry about that. Okay, so the dangers to which we are exposed from our women must now be manifest in the media's capacity. Even if the angle of a respectable triangle in the middle class is not without its dangers, and if to run against a working man involves a gash, a collision with an officer of the military class necessitates a serious wound. If a mere touch from the vertex of a private soldier brings with it the danger of death, okay, so the more pointed you are, the more danger you could possibly do. What can it be to run against a woman except absolute and immediate destruction? And when a woman is invisible, or visible only as a dim, some lustrous point, how difficult must it be for even the most cautious to avoid a collision? Okay, so basically women can turn invisible at will, and if you bump into one of them, you die. Okay, so it's pretty difficult. Okay, so in order to minimise this peril, in the southern and less temperate climates where the force of gravitation is greater and people are more liable to casual and involuntary emotions, the laws concerning women are naturally more stringent. Okay, so here are the laws concerning women. Right, every house shall have one entrance on the east side for the use of females only. And all females must enter in a becoming and respectful manner. Like, really? Okay. You mustn't come in by the men's door, the western door. Okay, so basically you come in through different doors, so there's no possibility there of bumping into each other accidentally. No female shall walk in any public space without continually keeping up her peace cry under penalty of death. So basically all the women in Flatland have to make a sort of noise all of the time to let people know that they're there. And if they don't make this noise, they're under penalty of death. Okay, so all the females in Flatland are going or wee or something. I don't know what. But there we go. So when I got to this point, I was kind of like, where is this guy going? And what is he on? Okay, so, and law number 3, any female duly certified to be suffering from St. Vitus dance. I don't know what that is, so I don't know if that's a thing, whether he made it up or whether it's actually a thing. Let's find out. Okay, so that's actually it's a real thing, a neuropsychiatric manifestation of rheumatic fever. Okay, what is it? Okay, it derives from the late Middle Ages when persons with the disease attended the chapels of victors who believed the curative powers. Okay, so it's sort of Huntington's disease. What is it called now? Now called Sydenham cura. What does it actually do? Or neurological disorder that happens in childhood. Right. What are the symptoms of it? Okay, so clumsy movements, muscle weakness, stumbling or falling down, not being able to speak clearly. Okay, all right. So those are the symptoms. Okay, so if any of the women are found to be stumbling around, having fits, chronic colds accompanied by violent sneezing, or any disease in the state of all emotions, shall be instantly destroyed. Okay. So if you're a woman and you live in Flatland, don't get sick. Okay. In some of the states, there's an additional law. Okay, it can't be a good life being a woman in Flatland at all. Forbidding females under penalty of death. The penalties are pretty severe in Flatland. Anything is basically punishable by death. Women are not allowed to walk or stand in any public place without moving their backs constantly from right to left, so as to indicate the presence to those behind them. Okay. So anyway, this goes on for quite some time. So there's a few quite funny things, right? So it's like, obviously then a woman is not to be irritated as long as she is in a position where she can turn around. So you must pin your woman into a corner before you irritate her. Oh dear. Anyway, right, so I think that's enough. You get the general idea, okay? You get the idea. Yeah, that's right. Women must wiggle. It is the law. It's so Drew gets banned from Twitch for reading this. I mean, it's pretty appalling, really, isn't it? It really is. Pretty. It is just the law. It's just it's dreadful, but it is the law of Flatland. Okay. So it's borderline misogyny. It is misogyny, in print. But I don't know whether it's satire or whether it's not. Have I read this to your wife yet? No, I'm not that brave. So a very, very strange book. So anyway, so let's keep going. Okay, so he does continue with the law a bit. All right. Our methods of recognising yes. Now they because they perceive each other as a line, regardless of whether or not they actually have points, because they can't perceive the points. If a triangle spins around in Flatland, all you see is a pulsating line. It just gets slightly wider and slightly thinner depending on what angle you're perceiving them from. So they can't tell in advance whether or not they are how many points they are. So what they basically the way they figure out their social class, okay, is they feel each other. So I'll let you think about that one for a moment. Uh, um, so and then basically that's how they figure out, okay, what class they're in, is they basically they kind of figure out how many edges they have, and yeah, if they come across a sharp pointy edge, then clearly you're a lower class person. So that's basically how it works. You just mind the pointy parts. So it seems I've got no idea. He doesn't get on to reproduction really, exactly how that works, because apparently everyone is just some sort of regular shape. So he does kind of point to it here. Basically, those readers who recall the extracts I gave from the legislative code concerning women will readily perceive that the process of introduction by contact requires some care and discretion. That's about as close as we get. Otherwise, the angles might inflict on the unwary feeler irreparable injury. Okay, it's just a bit of a warning. Anyway, so that's a little bit. Then it starts getting a little bit more sensible. Okay, they can't see angles, but they can infer them with great precision. So the sense of touch that they have, okay, stimulated by necessity and developed by long training, enables us to distinguish angles far more accurately than your sense of sight. Okay, so they can basically work out angles. That's one of the things that they can do. So there we go. So that's basically how that works. They can identify each other by their shape, effectively. They can identify themselves a bit by sight. So they can see, in a manner of speaking, but they can only see the aspect of the other shape that's facing them. And so it's kind of like it's kind of like a two-dimensional space game being viewed from the top. And they do have they can perceive distance as well, because things get fainter the further away they are. All right, so that sort of makes sense as well. So there's a little bit of geometry and maths in here, which shows that the guy who wrote it, Mr. Abbott, clearly had a problem with women, but he doesn't actually have a problem with maths. Okay, he's quite okay with maths, So it goes on about that, and a bit about geometry and various other bits and pieces in here, which actually kind of works. Okay, so there's some good stuff in here in terms of the structure he's put around the law of his universe. Then there's this horrible bit here about concerning irregular figures, which is basically effectively. It's just you just destroy people who aren't perfect, it's eugenics. Basically, that's what it is. It's so where an infant whose angle deviates by half a degree from the correct angularity is suddenly destroyed at birth. It's like, ouch. Okay, fine. So there we go. Although it does basically say some of our highest and ablest men of real genius, have during the earliest days laboured under deviations as great or even bigger than 45 minutes. Okay, as a subdivision of a degree, and the loss of their precious lives would have been an irreparable injury to the state. So there's commentary there that at least maybe eugenics isn't a good thing. But he basically says, if the medical board has reported that recovery is improbable, I would suggest the irregular offspring be painlessly immersively consumed. I really hope this is satire. I do. Then they talk about art, and they can paint. Okay. So, and then they have this bit about colour, and a universal colour bill and some other various bits and pieces. Now this is a bit weird. So they can perceive colour, and various other bits and pieces. So this goes on for quite some time. So I'm gonna push on through here, because if you want to read this, you can. It's not actually necessary for you to understand the story when we actually do eventually get to the story. But he spends a lot of time building his world, literally. And now these priests, this is the top echelon of the society, and they are basically painted as oddly enough, a bit like the priestesses in my Shadewood series. Basically, there has been a received truth, and you do not deviate from the received truth unless you just don't. Okay. So it's a curious thing. But it isn't necessary to understand the story. So if you want to wade your way through it is quite interesting, because it is a social structure that kind of makes sense in the context of what we're talking about in a 2D environment. He spends a lot of time on it. It clearly is very important to him in terms of building this world and so on and so forth. It's quite weird. But eventually he basically finishes building the world and goes, I suppose I ought to tell a story in this space. But if you take the world building out of this story, then you're left with something that's basically not even a novella length long. It's very, very short. So anyway, so here we go. Part 2, Other Worlds, right? And his first encounter, so the 1999th year of their era, okay, he had a long vacation. Having amused myself till a late hour with my favourite recreation of geometry, as you do. How many of you on the stream actually have geometry as your favourite recreation? Okay, hands up in the chat. Yeah, geometry. Yeah, I'm up for that. So what happens is he encounters a one-dimensional being in his two-dimensional world, right? Okay. Now what he encounters is the highest-ranking member of a one-dimensional society who intersects for some reason with Flatland, and what he encounters is basically the king of one-dimensional lands ends up in two-dimensional Flatland, and he comes from Lineland, okay. And basically what follows here is the king can't perceive anything but left or right, okay. He can only go left or right. There is nothing else. He's basically the king of left and right, and so anything else on that line beyond him is another individual. So basically, all individuals exist on either one side of the king or the other side of the king, because they can't cross over, because there's no way to cross over. There's no concept of crossing over. But to the two-dimensional square, he's sort of basically saying that. I'm looking at what I think is your side, but actually I'm looking at your middle. Okay, so yes, he would look like a woman as far as the other guy. A collection of women. He actually says that. Up here. Where it was. I saw before me a vast multitude of small straight lines, which I naturally assumed to be women, because that's what women would look like in Flatland, interspersed with other beings still smaller and of the nature of lustrous points, all moving to and fro in one same straight line. As nearly as I could judge, with the same velocity. So they basically, Lineland is a single line. That's all there is. Okay, and you can sort of see that here. The king, the men, a boy, and women are dots. Okay, women are only dots now. Men are lines, and longer lines are more important men. Basically, that's how Lineland works. And they have this hugely long debate about the existence of everything, and what it basically is the two-dimensional square trying to get across to the one-dimensional monarch the concept of two dimensions. That's what the next chapter is, basically. That's what it all is about. The illustrations are great help. Didn't get this in Audible. Okay, so that's, and it basically they're not basically what the conversation is, basically an explanation of the problem with the lesser dimensional being, shall we say, always being very obtuse and not getting it. So there has to be another analogy to try and get the point across. That's basically how it works. And that goes on for some time until they basically, the two-dimensional square crosses the line and is perceived by the king, because otherwise he can't see it. Because when the two-dimensional square is not on the line, the king can't see him. He can't perceive him, but he can hear him. It's up, sound waves can obviously cross dimensions in this thing, he appears to appear and disappear from the perspective of the one-dimensional king. I hope you all follow this, because it's quite cerebral. So that's his first encounters, right? And then it happens the other way, and this is the bit that I remember Carl Sagan talking about. Okay, so Carl Sagan obviously read this story at some point in his life, and he explained it on an episode of Cosmos. But he related it that an apple had fallen into, possibly borrowing from a bit of Isaac Newton, I suspect. An apple had fallen into Flatland, and the two-dimensional creatures were trying to perceive what the apple was, but of course they can only see a slice of the apple at any given time, because that's all they can perceive. So there we go. Anyway, so what happens here is a sphere arrives in Flatland. Okay, now the sphere hovers above Flatland for a bit, observing the Flatland creatures, and of course. And so they have this, long and entirely predictable conversation about the nature of space and time, but the sphere is hovering above Flatland. Okay, so they can converse, but the two-dimensional square cannot see the sphere. Okay, and so he's always hearing his voices in his head. These are coming from some place that he can't perceive. He doesn't have a concept of up or down. So the sphere is talking to him from apparently nowhere, and this goes on for quite some time. And then the sphere eventually descends into Flatland and touches Flatland, starting as a point and then becoming an increasingly wide circle, and then sinks through Flatland and then shrinks as a circle and eventually becomes back to a point again, because it can kind of move up and down through Flatland in some sort of way. So our two-dimensional square is then presented with an encounter with a being who can change his shape at will and change his size in a curious kind of a way, which alarms him a little bit. And then they have another debate about these sort of things. And then the sphere goes on. And basically, the sphere has been trying to explain 3 dimensions to this poor two-dimensional square, and eventually loses patience with him and basically whacks him and chucks him up into 3-dimensional space. The two-dimensional square is then presented by a 3-dimensional view of his world. So this is what he suddenly perceives from his now bizarre new 3-dimensional viewpoint. Okay, he perceives his house from above for the first time. Okay, and he perceives that this is what his house looks like. So it's quite a nice diagram of his house. So you can see the men's door and the women's door, his wife's apartment there. There's his bedroom. My daughter lives in there. There's a footman and a butler and somebody else. Scullion. There's a cellar. My grandsons live here. My sons live over here. There's a hall in the middle of his wife, actually, as you can see, is in the middle. I like the way the cellar is at the bottom of the house, i.e. on the south of the house. And there's a couple of policemen hanging around outside. So he's now able, from his 3-dimensional perspective on the 2-dimensional world, he can see into all of the rooms. Okay, all at the same time. He can see beyond the rooms. And you can see what the policemen are doing outside, while simultaneously being able to see what his wife and his daughters and his sons are doing on the inside. Okay, so, and this bit actually was quite profound when I was reading it. This is where the book actually finally started getting good, as far as I was concerned, because it's been a bit of a hard slog to get to this point. But what it basically implies here is that from a, if we move this up a dimension, right, from our perspective, okay, so let's say a 4-dimensional creature came to visit our 3-dimensional realm. What it would effectively imply is that a 4-dimensional creature would be able to see both inside and outside of our dwellings at the same time, and in fact see inside our bodies from a 4-dimensional perspective, okay, and be able to perceive all of this from this 4th dimension without us being able to perceive where that 4th dimension was. So it's if you move it up a level, it's actually kind of like, ooh, it's actually quite interesting, which maybe is what Mr. Abbott was aiming for. So, but you have to put in the effort to get this out of it. So hopefully on this stream you're basically going, thank God Drew went there. Because we don't have to. And you could as a 3-dimensional object, you could get it, you could basically jump over walls or jump through solid walls. We could start here, you could start here in 2-dimensional space, move into 3-dimensional space, move across here, and then descend into the middle of the hall without having gone through any of the intervening walls, because 3-dimensional creatures could do that. Okay. There's another little thing that basically he explores there. What does he do? He pokes him or something. That's right. I can basically. I mean, the language that the sphere uses is a bit weird, but he basically pokes him in the midst of his basically in the middle of his squareness. I mean, he basically pokes at his insides via 3-dimensional space, and basically, if the square feels something nudge him inside his body, because the 3-dimensional can basically poke the square in the middle, which, as far as the 2-dimensional square is concerned, is impossible, because you can't get to my middle without coming through my edges. But the 3-dimensional creature could do that. Okay, so it labours the point. Okay, it labours the point. And then the sphere continues on, basically saying, this is a revelation, effectively, from beyond, from above and beyond your limited 2-dimensional thing. You must spread the good news of 3 dimensions. So it's almost a little bit of a commentary on religious conversion here as well. You can't stretch the analogies too far, but it's got a kind of flavour of that. And basically, what happens is he tries to explain this to his grandson and doesn't succeed. His grandson doesn't get it, and he tries to explain it to other people in Flatland. And basically, they basically what happens is he gets arrested and taken for the council and gets locked up for revealing the truth of 3 dimensions, which is a dangerous and subversive piece of knowledge that is best kept suppressed, clearly. And that's basically it. So there we go. The end. So it's how do I summarise that sensibly? Okay, it's fascinating. It is fascinating from a kind of intellectual perspective. Okay, I really took one of the two. I did. So, do you think Carl Sagan read all the beginning of the book? Well, I'd love to know, because it somewhere, somebody will be able to dig out, somewhere in Cosmos is Carl Sagan basically draws a series of squares and circles on a piece of flat paper and explains about the, but he only does the dimensional theory piece, right? Basically, how weird would it be if we were flat creatures and we lived in flat space, flat land, and a 3-dimensional object came to visit it? And that's basically as far as Carl Sagan goes. He basically gets to the point where he doesn't do any of the background lore at all. Literally only the sphere effectively arriving in Flatland and presenting the square with the possibility that there's more to life than just north, south, east, and west. Okay, and somewhere in the Cosmos videos, that Carl Sagan is doing that. I remember Carl Sagan basically making the sphere chucks the two-dimensional creature up into 3 dimensions, and he gets the first time perception of a 2-dimensional world from a 3-dimensional perspective, which is a big deal. And I think that's where Carl Sagan basically stopped. So he was probably fairly wise to do that, I suspect, because he didn't go into any of the other stuff at all. That's all stuff that I hadn't realised was in this book. So it is a bit kind of like, okay, really, a bit weird. Definitely, hopefully satirical, but I'm not convinced, I'm afraid, that it was. But Carl Sagan basically goes on to say, okay, so could you apply the same thing to 4-dimensional space and 3-dimensional space? And he uses, and I'm going to draw this by hand. Well, not quite by hand, but you know what I mean. So imagine, okay, you're going to have to work with my paint shop skills, my paint skills here, because this is quite an interesting little thought experiment. All right. So here's paint, okay, and we're gonna take a little foray into 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional space here, right? So brace yourselves, okay, brace yourselves. And I'm going to use big friendly lines, okay. So what I'm going to, so I want you to imagine in your head a transparent cube, okay. So I think that's something you can probably manage, right? Okay, so a perfect glass cube, let's say. I don't think have I even got a perfect glass cube? Let me just check. I might have one. I haven't got one. I used to have one. I've probably got one downstairs. No, I haven't. Somewhere I've got a perfect glass tube. Okay, right. So here we go. So imagine a perfect glass cube. Now imagine the shadow that a perfect glass cube creates on the ground, and it would look something like this. All right. Okay, so I'm not going to draw this super neat because I can't. But okay, so here we go. This is if it cast a shadow, it would look something like this. All right. Okay, and this is the shadow of a cube being cast on a piece of paper. All right, and if it's transparent, it would sort of look like that. Okay, so this is very 80s. I haven't done that very well, but anyway, you know what I mean. Very 80s vector graphics. All right. Okay, so that's the sort of shadow you would see from a 3-dimensional cube if it casts a shadow on a piece of paper, right? And what's actually happened is we've turned our 3-dimensional object, right, into a 2-dimensional thing. This is what a 2-dimensional cube. Now we know for a cube that all the angles in a cube, right, are right angles. They're all 90 degrees, right? And in 2-dimensional space, some of the angles cast by a shadow of a 3-dimensional object are also 90 degrees, right? Okay, so there's an angle there. That one there is clearly 90 degrees, right? So is this one. But some of the angles are now distorted badly, okay? I know it's not a very good drawing of a cube, but you've got to bear with me, right? Okay, some of the angles are much bigger than 90 degrees. So in the translation, shall we say, between 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions, some of the angles get crushed or distorted or squashed, etc., etc. Okay, so mathematically, you can play this experiment forward. Now, I can't show you a 4-dimensional object, but we can show you a 3-dimensional shadow of a 4-dimensional object and talk about it. Okay, and that is some of you will know this. Some of a 3-dimensional object, a shadow of a 4-dimensional object in 3 dimensions, is known as a tesseract. Okay, there you go. Now that there, if I just get the picture, there we go. That is a 3-dimensional shadow, okay, of a 4-dimensional object, and exactly as the 3-dimensional object with its perfect right angles was distorted when it was translated into 2D. So again, the four-dimensional object has been distorted by being a shadow in 3 dimensions. Okay, now if we could perceive this in 4 dimensions, which we can't, okay, but if we could, every angle in here would also be at 90 degrees. Okay, I'll say that again. If we could perceive this object accurately in 4 dimensions, every angle in there would be at 90 degrees. Okay, I'll just leave you with that. See how many of you recover. Well, Cedar, this is a 4th spatial dimension, not a 4th time dimension, if that makes sense. Sean says, okay, I need a drink. Is there an animated tesseract? Let's see if I can find an animated tesseract, because that's even more weird. Because yeah, so this is the thing that the depending on where you perceive it, if you rotate a tesseract, you get a different shadow. Okay, you don't get, it's not a static object in 3 dimensions, because it doesn't work like that. Okay, let's see if I can find one. Rotating tesseract. So if you rotate a tesseract, you get something in 3 dimensions. You get something rather weird. Let me just get the silly adverts out of the way first. There we go. This is okay. This is when you rotate a 4-dimensional object and it casts a shadow in 3-dimensional space. This is what happens. Okay. I was watching that advert. The advert made a lot more sense to me than Tesseract. So this is a 4-dimensional cube. Okay. And every angle in there is a right angle. All right. You've probably got a headache now. But those are the sort of concepts that are being addressed by this story. So it's worthy in that sense. I feel that it makes you it does make you think. But it's got so much baggage maybe to kind of work through in order to get to that thing that it's. It's not on my recommended pile. Let's put it that way. Yeah, you'd have to be in a very, very rarefied class of people in my personal list of people to basically say, yep, that book Flatland is right up your street. You'll love it. But it is famous. Okay, it is famous. I mean, let's have a look. I mean, I haven't even done this research. I should have done by around that time. Let's look up the Wikipedia entry on it, just out of curiosity. Let's just see what is made of it here. Okay. This is good. Okay, so here's it is a satirical novel. Thank goodness for that. That's good. I wouldn't recommend it to my worst enemy. Okay, so the book used the fictional 2-dimensional world Flatland to comment on the hierarchy of Victorian culture, but the novella's more enduring contribution is an examination of dimensions. Okay, so it is a biting satire, which is good. Okay, on Victorian culture. There's a feature film called Flatland. Is there? Never even heard of that. I need to check that out. Well, I'm glad it is a satirical novel. Okay, biting satire, definitely biting satire. Anyway, so that's what it's all about. Okay, so men are portrayed as polygons whose social status is determined by regularity, and so forth. So okay, let's read this little bit about social satire. In Flatland, Abbott describes a society rigidly divided into classes, as we've kind of discussed. Social ascent is the main aspiration of its inhabitants, apparently granted to anyone, but strictly controlled by the top of the hierarchy. Freedom is despised and the laws are cruel. Innovators are imprisoned or suppressed. So the main points of interest are the Victorian concept of women's roles in society and the class-based hierarchy of men. Abbott has been accused of misogyny due to his portrayal of women in Flatland. His preface to the second and revised edition, he answers such critics by emphasising the description of women was satirising the viewpoints held, stating that the Square was writing as a historian. and has identified himself perhaps too closely with the views generally adopted by Flatland, and as has been informed even by Spaceland. Historians in these pages, until very recent times, the destinies of women and the masses of mankind have seldom been deemed worthy of mention, never of careful consideration. So, okay, so there we go. It's pretty sharp. Interesting enough, okay, so critical reception here. Although Flatland was not ignored when it was published, it did not obtain great success. Interesting, okay. So in the entry on Edwin Abbott in the Dictionary of National Biography for persons who died in that era, Flatland wasn't even mentioned. Okay, the book was discovered again after Albert Einstein's General Theory of Relativity was published, which brought prominence to this concept of a fourth dimension. Flatland was mentioned in a letter entitled Euclid, Newton and Einstein, published in Nature, and Abbott is depicted as a bit of a prophet due to his intuition about the importance of time to explain certain phenomena. Okay, there we go. So it didn't receive accolades when it was written. I wonder why. Yeah, but it's a significant novel, I suspect. There we go. Okay, so in popular culture, physicists and science popularizers Carl Sagan and Stephen Hawking have both commented and postulated upon the effects of Flatland. Sagan recreates the thought experiment as a setup to discussing the possibility of higher dimensions in the universe in both the book and television series Cosmos. So I was remembering that accurately. So there, it's been hammed up in Futurama apparently. It was in the Big Bang Theory, and in the Orville. Okay. I don't remember that. I've watched the Orville as well. New dimension. After entering a region of two-dimensional space, Captain Mercer references Flatland in its theme of social hierarchy. I'm gonna have to go and watch that again. So it's got some. Oh yeah, Gravity Falls is implied by the main antagonist Bill Cipher that he originates from dimensions similar to Flatland. So it's got a bit of a legacy. It's fair to say. But and I do remember it. I remember the Carl Sagan, but I hadn't read the book. I've got the feeling I hadn't read the book. I thought I had, but I don't think I had actually in hindsight. I think what I was remembering is the Carl Sagan thought experiment. I must have watched that as a sort of teenager and been quite impressed by the idea of 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions and 4 dimensions. And I think that's what I must have remembered. So and there's even a Star Trek episode, The Loss. The Enterprise becomes trapped within a field of 2-dimensional life forms. I'm going to go and look those sort of stuff, those things up. I hadn't realised that. So that's interesting. And there's a movie apparently. How did that work? How do you film a movie in 2 dimensions? Flatland the movie is a short animated film released to video in 2007. Wow. Okay. maybe we should investigate that. Oh, you've had Cosmos for years. No, I eventually settled down and read it as well a few years ago. It's a good read, Cosmos, actually. Yeah, I used to just look at the pictures when I was younger, but yes, it's a good read. So there we go. So an interesting book. I don't think it's a good story. I don't think it's a good story at all. I don't think that's maybe what it was attempting to be. You know, it's satirising a society that's long gone. So it's probably interesting in that kind of context. I think it's interesting in its context for the 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional stuff. Did the hero get the girl? No, she was a bit too pointed. It isn't really a story. You're quite right. It's of interest in an intellectual capacity, I think, and it depends how much intellectual capacity you've got as to how far you can go. You can go down that route. So I think it's notable. But I'm gonna be harsh, and I think I'm gonna give it like a 4 out of 10 because it's kind of not our kind of story on this stream. It's significant. I think it's notable in the annals of stuff. But yeah, fascinating, but not actually a classic story. More of a diagram than the story. Yeah, I think that's right. So, but a good submission to the writing stream. It was interesting. It was interesting. So, and it made me think. And it made me remember stuff from a long time ago, like the cosmos and stuff. So notable in the annals of stuff, in the waffling annals, definitely merits a note. So from a story perspective, I'm going to give it a 4. But I think from a historical context and the fact that it's got a bit of a legacy in sci-fi, so we can't ignore that, can we? If there's a Star Trek episode based off it, and the Orville's based off it, there's a movie based off it, and Carl Sagan, God bless him, and Stephen Hawking, God bless him, thought it was worthy of note, then who am I to disagree with that? So I think it redeems itself in the sense that it does provide an interesting thought experiment for us to consider. So I think that elevates it back up again. So 4 for story, but maybe 5 or 6 for impact, because it's a significant story, and possibly also an extra bonus point for having the courage to satirise Victorian society in such a way. So maybe that was worthy too. So there we go. That was Edwin Abbott, curiously named individual, and yeah, well, that was Flatland. So, any closing thoughts on that one? It was quite weird. We ought to turn our attention to, I suppose, also, what are we going to read next? Or what am I going to read next? Because none of you boys ever read. None of you lot ever bother reading. We never heard about Pointland. It was pointless. Yeah, I knew that was coming. I was just waiting for that one. I read too fast. I do read fast. I consume books at a ridiculous rate, I have to say. Yes. Frankenstein, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's a nice easy romp, probably by comparison. Yes. We haven't done any Jules Verne. Can we have something good this time? Frankenstein. Well, we've had 3 votes for Frankensteins. I think Jules Verne will get to. There's definitely some space for Verne, but I'm assuming Frankenstein is on here. Which one is it? Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Frankenstein. Oh, is that the correct book? It is Shelley. Yeah. Okay, I couldn't remember. Yeah. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so well, if you want to crack on with Frankenstein for next week, let's just see roughly how long that is. I'm going to see how far I get, because I can kind of do about 30,000 words in one sitting. Let's just see how long a story this one is. This one looks a little bit more meaty. Sorry if that's giving you. It's like flickering lights on the screen. Drew, what are you doing? There we go. That's the license. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that and stick it into Word for a moment, just so we know roughly how long it is. How big a novel is it? It is. Oh, this is a chunker. Okay, we're not going to get through all of that. 77,000 words. It's interesting that these books are shorter than a lot of what we write now. I mean, I think if I haven't got to 100,000 words, I kind of haven't done my job right, when I'm writing a book. This one appears to be more of a story, though. So let's sample the top. There we go. Introduction to publishers. Okay, so it's again, what sort of time is this written? So 1831. So this is early. This is seriously early now. This is actually 50 years before the stuff that we've been talking about. So even earlier. But it does. It's probably more readable than the one we just read. So let's see how we go with that. So your homework, my dear friends. 8 hours in Audible, it's doable. Yeah. So I reckon I can get. Well, I don't know if I'll get through all that in 1 week. That's quite a lot. But let's see how it goes. Because the purpose of these streams is to maybe touch upon some things that we haven't collectively read before, and not necessarily to finish the book, but go, is this a book that's worth putting on the to read pile? Is kind of my thinking. And we've had 2 hits. I mean, I think The Time Machine and War of the Worlds, definitely, if you haven't read them, read them. I think we've probably done enough justice to Flatland that you probably don't need to bother. All right. Frankenstein will be number 4. Let's find out whether or not that one's actually going to be a keeper or not. So there we go. How about the Clangers Christmas Annual? That'll be short. I'm not sure that's copyright free, however, Commander CD, which is alas one of the things that we must obey on the stream. We can't use any still copyright valid works. So I think is the author has to have been dead for 70 years or something. So alas, I don't think the Clangers are going to fall into our remit anytime soon. If I'm still streaming 30, 40 years from now, at the age of 90 something, maybe we can do the Clangers. If you remember, Commander Sea Dweller, if you let me know in 2090 or whatever it is, no, it'll be about 2070. No, 2060. Remind me in 2060 and we'll go look it up. See how it's going. So there we go. So anyway, so Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus. I hadn't heard them talked about the modern Prometheus. It's always just referred to as Frankenstein, isn't it? We'll see. We'll see how that goes. Good stuff. Right, my friends, it's time once again to vanish off. Good luck with your homework. Okay. Attention for those who haven't done their homework. And we'll see. Let's see what we make of Frankenstein. Because I must admit, I haven't read Frankenstein. Upwards, not northwards. Yeah. I haven't read Frankenstein at all. So this is a new one on me. I know of it, but I haven't read it. So I will look forward to that one. So let's do that. Frankenstein for next week, my friends, and we'll see what's about. But until then, be good. Look after yourselves. I shall see you on Thursday. And if you see a sphere, my advice is avoid it. And if you see a woman, just run away screaming. Okay, they're incredibly dangerous and need to be avoided at all costs. unless you manage to corner one in a curiously shaped room. But there we go. Be good. Look after yourselves. Take care, my friends, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye now.